I'm used to. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Sally Martin, and Sally Martin Bishop, actually. And I'm from the late 1700s, so you can understand why this looks a little different to me. Somehow, I, along with 3 other people from the 1700s, have been brought to this time to talk to you today. We have Benjamin Eastman, we have Sarah Ticknor, Richardson Bishop, and we have Samuel Young. So, yes, and there you are.
Benjamin Whitcomb.
Oh, I didn't say Benjamin Whitcomb? Oh, I'm sorry, Benjamin Whitcomb.
You put it in the wrong town, too.
I did?
What are you questioning about? You could get 140 years.
This is what I put up with all the time when I'm around them, so anyway. So I'm not quite sure how we got here, and I certainly hope there was no witchcraft involved. I know Mistress Fitzgerald was involved with it, and she seems like a very nice person, so I don't think there is. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking about all that, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself and about my father. So my father was Samuel Martin, and my mother was Ann Hurd, and I was the 7th of 12 children. And I was born in 1755 in Woodbury, Connecticut. And my father, Samuel, came up here, and he brought his family, of course, and then in 1775, I married Josiah Bishop. And I was his first wife. We had 5 children together. Samuel, after my father, of course, Ruth, Sarah, Leonard, and the youngest, Stephen. Unfortunately, I passed away in 1789, but I would say that I'm glad my husband did remarry. He married Esther Aldrich and had children with her, and then he married Sarah Ticknor Richardson, who is here too, and she's going to tell you a little bit about our husband, and I'll tell you more about father. I was very glad he remarried because life was very difficult back then, and to try to raise children on your own and take care of everything that he would have needed to do would have been very, very difficult without a wife. So it made the work a little bit easier. So I will say one thing about Josiah, my husband, though, that I was with him when he built the first log cabin on the west side of the Ammonoosuc River, over by where I think there was something at one time called a golf course. So he built a cabin over there. You know, and then he went off to fight in the War for Independence, and of course left me at home with the children. And it was very difficult. Sometimes we would get notified that we had to hide in the woods because enemies were near, whether they be Indians or British. Plus, we didn't get mail hardly at all, so we didn't know most of the time if our father, our husband, and our brother, if they were alive still during the war. So very, very difficult time. But anyway, luckily my father, Samuel, and my husband, Josiah, and my brother, William, all made it through the war alive. So my father, Samuel Martin, was born in 1722, also in Connecticut, and he arrived here around 1763. And he was the first white settler in this town that you now call Lisbon. The first charter was as Concord, I believe. My father came up here on a hunting expedition. Now, I'm not really sure how he heard about this area. It might have been from people, men that had been captured by the Indians and then set free, or were they escaped. Or there's a possibility, my father was also in the French and Indian War, and he was in Captain Ladd's company. And one time they were heading to Canada, and they ended up being at Lake Winnipesaukee. They had to stop for the winter. And so they did a lot of exploring of the area, so he might have come up here then. But whatever, he did come up here. he was a hunter. In fact, he was quite a famous hunter. And he hunted sometimes with General John Stark. You probably know him. I mean, he's the one that first penned the state motto now, live free or die. So, anyway, he came up hunting, and he even went further. He went up to a town you call Lancaster now, and he had my brother William with him, who was 9 at the time. And he built a little shack up by a pond that's called Martin Meadow Pond. I'm sure it's named after my father. Oh, and by the way, Mistresses Fitzgerald and Wiggins have at this place a replica of my father's powder horn that he used during the French and Indian War. I'm going to share that with you right here. So this is a replica of his powder horn. And it looks a lot like the original. I wish I could remember what happened to the original, but I'm not sure. But I'm going to pass this around so you can look at it.
I've seen a few of these in my time.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have.
Actually, that says made in China.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So anyway, moving on. Thank you, gentlemen. My father really liked this area, Samuel Martin did, and he decided to settle here along the banks of the Ammonoosuc River. And he actually built the first cabin in town. And he built it near a pond that's now called Hanno Pond. I believe it's on the road as you go up toward Littleton. When the Young family, though, that would be Samuel Young, when they got the land from the proprietors, a deed from the proprietors, my father moved further north because they took over that land. So he moved further north toward Salmon Hole, and near where the Salmon Hole Cemetery, I think, now is. I remember when the first church was built here, the first school. Oh, to just give you an idea of the population when we lived, the September 21st, 1775 census showed 14 males under 16, 6 males 16 to 50 that were not in the Army, 2 males over 50, and at that time 5 men had already left for the Army. So there were 20 females and no slaves. So the total population back then in 1775 was 47. Now, definitely a lot smaller than what it is now, and a lot fewer buildings. Oh, and by the way, there were 14 pounds of gunpowder listed. That was very important. Of course, my father was also one of the settlers who served in the War for Independence. Both he and my oldest brother, William, enlisted at Young's Tavern, which I think has had several names since then, including the Cobley Tavern and Clark Farm. And then he went in to serve in Bedell's regiment. And I believe my father enlisted in about 1778. He was about 56 at the time, so he was one of the older gentlemen enlisting. Now my brother William, he was also a very famous hunter and a trapper. And he would go off on long expeditions, and he would take with him a very good friend of his, an Indian, and they would go off for months at a time. Just so you can picture my brother, because he was quite a character. He was a really big guy, very tall, very heavy, and he had long hair, and he always wore it in like a braid down his back. And he was a very, very firm believer in witches. I will not tell him about what has happened to us. So William ended up moving to Lyman, and he was very involved in the town. Let's see, I do have some of the jobs he had down here. For one thing, he was a deer reeve, sort of like a game warden now, connecting with deer. He was pound keeper for a while. So he was responsible for any stray livestock that got away from their owners. He was also a highway surveyor, fence viewer, and an abundance of other things. Well, I could go on and on about my family and what was going on back then. I mean, it was a very busy time up here. For one thing, I know a lot of people were starting to move in around 1774, especially into Landup, which is another town near here. A lot of people moving up there. So there were a lot of things going on, but there are 3 other people waiting to talk to you. So I'm going to turn it over now to Benjamin Whitcomb, and make sure I get your right name. So I will let you know that in the Army, he had a reputation of being a very good soldier, but it was said he was also a stalker and a rascal. In other words, he was a pretty sneaky fellow.
We had other names for him too, but we don't have
Well, this is being a stalker, but I was never a rascal. My name is Benjamin Whitcomb. I was born on July 2nd, 1737, in Lancaster, Massachusetts. That's now present-day Leominster, Massachusetts. My father was a deacon. He was Deacon Ben Whitcomb, and my mother was Dorothy White Whitcomb. I was the third. Let me tell you first. I'm buried up in Salmon Hole Cemetery. On my gravestone it says Major Whitcomb in the Continental Line of the Revolutionary War. And I'm quite far down by the river in the old section of the cemetery. And when I was first buried, it was a very quiet area. All I could hear was the river rushing by. But over the last 150 years, horseless carriages have come down that road and spoiled my peace and quiet. So I was the third of 19 children, which included 2 sets of twins, my poor mother. But you know, it really wasn't as crowded around that house as it seems, because when each child reached the age of 15 or 16, they flew out of the nest. They found work somewhere, either on a farm or somewhere around. And so it really wasn't as quiet. And when the twins reached 16, there was 2 less people. When not doing chores on the farm, I roamed freely over hill and dale, hunting and fishing, and did a lot of trapping as well. And that's where I learned a lot of the skills that I put to use in the military, when I was in the military. I honed skills that would serve me well for the rest of my life. At 17, I enlisted in the Massachusetts Regiment and went off to fight in the French and Indian War. I was first in the Battle of Lake George in September of 1755. And in 1760, I joined General Jeffrey Amherst's successful expedition against Montreal, and I was promoted to first lieutenant. In these battles, I served as a ranger and a scout, and I learned much from our Indian allies. We were allies with the Iroquois at that time. After the war, I marched south through Vermont on the Crown Point Road. It's hard to believe that Vermont, back in those days, was considered the frontier. And it was really considered to be out west by most New Englanders. So we marched back on the Crown Point Road, southwest, down through Vermont, and that's where I got a chance to really see the countryside. I really fell in love with the area. And, I met my wife, Lydia, in Westmoreland, New Hampshire, and we started a family. We moved up the Connecticut River to Guildhall, Vermont, and we started a farm on 100 acres. The land was offered as a bounty to anyone who was willing to develop it and turn it into a farmland. So we started a family. We had 6 children, and their names were, I have to look at my notes for those. Lydia, Joshua, Ben, Azuba, and Ruth. We had no twins at all. I was glad of that. I served as a justice of the peace in the county of Gloucester, Vermont. And back then, justice of the peace had a greater role. They tried criminal cases. They also settled land disputes, and they were tax officers as well. It's amazing, but we were very slow to get news of Boston and the grievances against King George III in Parliament. And even we had really still getting the news about the battles of Lexington and Concord. But that changed in the winter of 1775. We heard about General Benedict Arnold and Richard Montgomery, General Montgomery, began a campaign to attack Canada. And so a third group of a New Hampshire regiment was formed, and the commanding officer was Colonel Timothy Bedell from Orford. And I joined up with him, and I was commissioned second lieutenant. And I was at Samuel Young's company. There's Sam right here in the front row.
And he was a rascal.
Hi, Sam, you're looking sharp in your great finery there.
Rascal.
I served as a recruitment officer for a while, so I stayed behind when the regiment moved up towards Canada. But eventually I caught up with them. But by that time, the Army was in full retreat. So we fought a rearguard action at Isle-aux-Sault in Quebec, and made our way back to the fort at Crown Point, over on Lake Champlain. And this was in July of 1776. About 2 weeks after we returned to the fort, we heard the news of the Declaration of Independence had been signed in Philadelphia. So we got an extra ration of grog that night. Short while after that, I took on a scouting and spying mission up through up the Richelieu River up into Canada, toward Montreal. And this is where I got the reputation for being a scoundrel. I mortally wounded the commander of the British 1st Brigade, Timothy Gordon. And I was called by some a skulker and a rascal, that I should be hanged. And there was actually, even George Washington wasn't pleased with my action. Thought I'd gone too far in shooting an officer. By all means, you shouldn't be shooting any officers, especially if they're riding on a horse. But I was soon forgiven, and went back a few weeks later, and I captured a corporal and a quartermaster of General Gordon's regiment. So then I was a hero. American General Horatio Gates was so impressed that he promoted me to captain, and ordered me to form 2 companies of Rangers, soon to be known as Whitcomb's Rangers. We operated as scouts and raiders and spies. There were groups of no more than 6 men who slipped behind British lines, days and weeks, went for days and weeks at a time, and we were a motley crew. We dressed as Indians and Canadians. My Rangers fought bravely in key battles. In 1777 at Saratoga, we fought at Saratoga. The Battle of Bennington, also Hubbardton. And at Saratoga, we fought with Dearborn's Light Infantry. And I was the first one to spot the British advance coming along Bemis Heights at Saratoga. But you know, it was really easy to do because the British were all dressed in red, and they had these high hats, and so I could spot them even without a glass from miles away. So I hardly take credit for it. I was promoted to major in November of 1777, and I was commander-in-chief at Fort Ranger in Rutland, Vermont. Late in 1778, Whitcomb's Rangers stopped a secret British mission to burn mills and supply depots in the Connecticut River Valley. We'd actually known about the plans for this raid for months in advance because of our scouts. The Rangers were sent to the upper Connecticut River Valley, and we set up at Haverhill in New Hampshire, and that's where we began to build the Bailey-Hazen Road, which was a planned route for the next Canadian invasion, which actually never happened. We built blockhouses every 10 miles along that road. And it was built with axes and sweat and oxen. And it went from Newbury up all the way up to near where Jay Peak is now, Jay, Vermont. But the invasion never actually happened. But there's still sections of that road that you can visit and walk on. There's one over near Joe's Pond, in Danville, Vermont. You can actually walk on part of that road. That's the original Bailey-Hazen Road. In 1780, We were involved in a raid on, we foiled a raid on Coast County. The British raided it. And when they found out we had 500 men waiting for them, they made a detour and they went south and attacked the White River Valley instead. And the area around Royalton, Vermont was hit very hard by that. The Rangers disbanded in January 1781. That was just a few months before the Battle of Yorktown, where the French came in and helped us and we won the war. I had actually returned home, and I was up visiting some folks in Lancaster, and I was captured by some French raiders, and I was taken up to Canada. And I did escape with the help of a man named Louis Gill, who was an Englishman who had lived with the Abenakis. And he helped me escape. He gave me a bag of flour, a gun, and a canoe, and I was skedaddled. I got out of there pretty quick. In 1785, my family moved to Lisbon. And we built the first framed house in Lisbon. And that house still exists. It's up on the corner in Savageville Road. There's a sharp corner. That house looks like a barn attached. That was my house. I served in the town of Lisbon in many ways. I was a selectman for a while. I was a justice of the peace. And I served in many other functions. A little after that, I built a farm on the west side of the river. Sam Young here, my old friend, and company commander, helped me secure the property. He ran the tavern in town, and he owed me some on some wages that we made when we were in camp a few years before that. He owed me on a game of drafts, now they're called checkers, and a cribbage game he had to pay up for. Remember that, Sam?
Fat chance.
So he helped me to secure some property on the other side of the river, and I built a farm over there. So thanks again, Sam. And thank you all very much. The next speaker is Sally Ticknor.
It's a hard outfit to sit in. So I